All right. Hello, everyone.
All right, our apologies, folks. We think it's a full moon because we've all been failing miserably at our tasks today. So our for the late start, lots of cross communications, but we're on now, and we will just make it an amazing meeting. So there you go.
Yeah, so sorry for the delay, everyone. I don't have my own work Zoom account yet, so one of the trade-offs with not dealing with Teams anymore and switching to Zoom is easier for everybody. It's set for me personally at this particular moment.
Yeah, and apparently the rest of our staff too, just yes. So there you go.
So the good news is Marcia gave me permission to spend money on my own Zoom account in the 15 minutes that we've been waiting. So we'll make sure that this doesn't happen again at future
Jessica,
meetings.
the
Yeah.
link you sent out isn't clickable. So those who may not be familiar with Zoom may not know to enter in the meeting ID and passcode.
Oh, it's not clickable.
I don't think so. I wasn't able to click on it.
Okay, let me send the right one then.
Are you talking about what was on the agenda? Because I did it that way.
Maybe others were able to click on it.
You're talking about what I just sent in the
the email that you
to
just
members?
sent.
Okay.
Yep.
I used what was on the agenda.
Let me resend that. Thanks for pointing that out, Hal.
Does somebody have a working link yet?
We do. We think.
Was that Bill?
Yes, this was Bill Richard.
Okay. Let me. I am just going to send it with the link not embedded in text. One sec. Sorry, I don't do my best clicking at high speeds. Oh, come on. Okay. And of course, this happens on the day we've got new folks. All right, I just sent an email to members with the full written out link, so you should just be able to click on it now. But looks like we've got Hal, Aaron, Emma, Mavis. And we've got Bill on the phone, hopefully Lauren. Oh, there you go. And now we've got Bill on video as well. And we've got Lauren. So we have a full crew. And I will just hand it over to you, Hal, to kick us off. Oh, but you're on mute, Hal.
Welcome, everybody. So this is the Oregon Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. So if you were intending to attend this committee meeting, you are at the right place. If not, you have the wrong link. So I think we can just start with our members introducing themselves. We have 4 of them here today. So my name is Hal Hagedorn. I am the chair of OBPAC and also an at-large member. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I work at Portland State University. I am going to call on Emma next.
Good afternoon, everyone. Glad we're up and working. Emma Newman, I am the vice chair of OBPAC, and I live in Springfield, Oregon. My day job is as the senior transportation planner with the city of Springfield, but I serve on OBPAC purely on the interest of Oregonians. So I will pass it over to Mavis.
I'm Mavis. I am in LeGrand, Oregon. I am the retail bit of the OBPAC crew. And Aaron, it looks like you're next.
Hey everyone, my name is Aaron Mendez. I am the under 21 chair on OBPAC. I'm currently studying civil engineering at Oregon State University. So I spend 9 months out of the year in Corvallis, but I'm currently down in Southern Oregon, where I'm originally from. Grew up in Phoenix, but currently my family is living in Medford.
Oh, you're muted again. We can't hear you.
Sorry, that's all of the members we have here today. We are missing Robert Spurlock and Michael Black. I think with that, we can move into public comments. And as Jessica has written in the chat box, so if there are any members of the public who'd like to introduce themselves at this time or provide public comments, please add your name to the chat, or you can use in the reactions the hand raising sign. So either way will work. I will pause to see if there are any public comments.
I believe we have 2 prospective committee members who we're hopeful the governor will be appointing to our committee. So if the 2 of you would like to say a few words, just introduce who you are. I'm glad that you're here listening in today.
My name is Bill Richard. I am one of the prospective members hoping for the governor's approval to become an OBPAC member. I'm an avid cyclist. I'm 74 years old. I'm also I also suffer Parkinson's disease. And I have to say that bicycling has been the #1 way that I have slowed the progress of Parkinson's symptoms. And it's an honor to be here and to represent older Americans. I'm originally from Minnesota, but I served as the chief of staff to a Minnesota member of Congress in Washington for 29 years and served as the governor's Washington representative for 4 years. So I've been involved in public politics, but I've been retired now for going on 6 years, and bicycling is something I am passionate about. Thank you.
Great. Welcome, Bill. We have a couple of former Minnesotans here today. So Jessica also grew up in Minnesota as well as myself. So you are in good company. And I do remember the legacy that Jim Oberstar has left as far as transportation in Minnesota. So great to have you. And I believe we have...
It's exciting.
Yeah. And Lauren, feel free to introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm Lauren Morris. I'm with the Coquille Indian Tribe. I'm not even going to attempt to follow Bill and all he's accomplished, but I am here representing tribal communities and rural communities in walking and bicycling. I'm the mobility coordinator for our tribe, and I've sat on the board of directors for the Coos County Area Transit. And I'm also on the advisory board for Safe Routes to School. And I'm glad to be here.
Great. And we're also happy to have you here too. So I do believe the tribal perspective is grossly underrepresented. And we really appreciate to have your perspective moving forward and that of the tribes. So with that, I think that's a good segue into the update on the member recruitment. So I'm not sure if Aaron or Jessica will want to provide an update on that agenda item.
Aaron, did you just want to provide an overview of how we wrapped up the process with the working group, and then I can give an update on the status with the governor's office?
Yeah, so the group working group was myself, Jeff Munson, Robert Spurlock, and Michael Black. And I think we received over 20 applications, right, Jessica? So we had a ton of really good applicants, a lot of interest in the committee, which we were really excited to see. And from that pool of 20 applicants, we decided to interview 4 of them. And after that round of interviews, we decided to recommend Bill and Lauren for the positions.
Yeah, so Bill and Lauren's recommendations have been forwarded to the Governor's Office of Boards and Commissions. I followed up with them and am still just waiting to hear back on confirmation that they received those and what the current timeline is for processing appointments. Hopefully it should be reasonable now that the legislative session has wrapped up, but that does usually take a couple months. So very thankful that Bill and Lauren are willing to join us as our special guests in that interim time. And yeah, so that is the latest on that.
Great, and we're all anxious to hear back from the governor's office, because I think we've been operating as a less than full committee, and it'd be great to have you both on board to help out with our very ambitious work plan. So we're ready to assign you to different tasks whenever the governor gives us the thumbs up. All right, so let's move on to division and minister updates. So I'll hand that over to Marcia.
Yes, hi all. I'm Marcia Hoskins, Policy and Implementation Manager for the ODOT Public Transportation Division. Normally, you'd be receiving this update from Karen Criswell, our Public Transportation Division Administrator, but probably on our way back from Yellowstone at this moment, taking the week off from vacation. Sometimes I know you've received these updates from Susan Peichman, our Strategic Investment Manager, who is also camping somewhere in the Cascades this week. So I am the one that Jessica and I will tag team giving you our division administrator updates. So the first piece I wanted to do is a bit of a legislative session update from an ODOT perspective. So bringing up the information I have on the end of the legislative session. And if I goof up on anything, Patrick, even though you're a member of the public, you can always flag me in the chat box that I'm saying this incorrectly. But so first of all, House Bill 5542, which is ODOT's agency budget bill, passed. There were, to my knowledge, none of our proposed budget expenditures got cut, which is amazing. So we were really pleased to see that happen. In the House Bill 5006, the appropriations bill, that bill actually included $80 million for safety improvements to Oregon 213 82nd Avenue. That involves a jurisdictional transfer from ODOT to the city that Jessica will give you more detail on in a minute. It also calls for ODOT and the city of Portland to provide additional funds to support improvements and the transfer. So we'll circle back to that one. Just a couple other quick pieces. House Bill 2139 codified the Rural Veterans Healthcare Transportation Program, which is a partnership with the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs and our Public Transportation Division to provide transportation for veterans in rural communities to healthcare and other services. It was a pilot program in the 1921 biennium, and this actually codifies it, so it will be a continuing program, actually originating with the Department of Veterans Affairs and through revenue transfer and other behind the scenes pieces administered by ODOT in form of a grant program. House Bill 2985 actually legislates the racial, ethnic, and ability composition of ODOT advisory committees, stating that advisory committees need to reflect the makeup of the communities that they're representing. And then House Bill 3055 is the Omnibus Transportation Bill, which included various policy and program changes, technical corrections, project financing, and tolling statute revisions. So it allows flexibility in spending funds that were previously limited to the I-5 Rose Quarter project to also be used for I-205 Stafford to Oregon 213, the I-5 Boom Bridge. It also, and toll program implementation. It also made some technical updates to tolling to better align with federal requirements. And it requires ODOT to determine a method for establishing equitable income-based toll rates prior to beginning a tolling program, and to provide a report to the Joint Committee on Transportation on that method 90 days before the OTC seeks from the Federal Highway Administration. And there was a fee that probably applies more to school bus and public transportation agencies. House Bill 2137 eliminated DMV knowledge tests under circumstances and extended citation moratorium. And then lastly, as you're all aware, amendments to the bike bill did not make it out of committee in this session. There were some other appropriations that we in our division are paying attention to. There was disbursements to several public transportation agencies to offset expiring tax credits. There was funding directed to several pedestrian, school bus, and even trolley projects across Oregon. And so I can try and provide a summary of those in an email afterwards. Right now, it's a fairly large, detailed spreadsheet, and I'll try and pull out the components and share that with folks afterwards. But these were miscellaneous allocations and budget notes that came through in our agency budget. So I'll be glad to share that. And then Jessica, if you don't mind expanding a bit on the
Sure.
Avenue jurisdictional transfer.
Yep. And in your packet on the Google Drive, there's item 1.1. That's the whole packet with every single thing related to transportation that went through in this session. If you want to get in the weeds, and if you have any questions on that, anything in that packet, just let me know, and we'll get you some more information on it. The big ones, as Marcia mentioned, that are new developments since last time the committee met are in the budget bill, and that is the 4 million in TOF, or the Transportation Operating Fund, or lawnmower tax dollars that we were hoping for community paths did go through with the budget. So yay. We can fund all the projects we were hoping to. The other big one is $80 million for the jurisdictional transfer of 82nd Avenue from ODOT to the city of Portland. After there were a couple of pedestrian fatalities on 82nd, there was the creation of that $10 million pedestrian safety quick response program from OTC that we kind of introduced you all to at the last meeting. Also, something that came out of that was kind of unprecedented was a joint letter from ODOT and the city of Portland to the legislature saying that we would like to make this transfer happen. Here is the amount of funding we would need to make it happen. If you can put in, they're estimating that it would cost $185 million total to bring 82nd Avenue up to a good state of repair for that jurisdictional transfer. The legislature provided 80 million for that. ODOT is now has promised to provide 70 million for that transfer, with the city of Portland providing the remaining 35 million. And so that ODOT contribution is above and beyond what we've got programmed right now in the 21-24 STIP. And it is above and beyond that 3.3 million that we are allocating to 82nd Avenue, like rapid response, pedestrian safety improvements from that 10 million that the Oregon Transportation Commission approved in, I believe that was in May. So pretty major investment, pretty exciting. There is of that 70 million of ODOT's contribution, 3 million that we are being asked to contribute from the Ped Bike program. So we'll talk about that a little bit more and some of the options for where that funding is going to come from when we talk about SWIP strategic and the STIP a little bit later on. So any questions on that piece? Emma?
I just wanted to say I'm really grateful to see a comprehensive corridor funded in our state that has a proven safety issue, which is very similar to other corridors in the state. We have it here where I live, but I can think across Oregon. I think up to when we as a committee were up in Astoria talking with Ken Junkweiler about the divided funding silos and how the current 24-27 STIP buckets are very, well, we can do this sliver with this, and you can do this sliver with this, and to piece it all together to create a comprehensive project that actually funds a corridor at the level needed. It's great to see that happening on 82nd Avenue, and I'm hoping that this is precedent to have similar support on other similar corridors throughout the state, so we can truly save lives statewide every single year from here on out. So thanks to everyone who's making this happen, and I hope it's just a seed that continues to grow more broadly.
All right, so other additional updates that I can provide on behalf of our division. You just heard Jessica reference the pedestrian safety program piece that was approved by the commission in May. Included in your materials is a presentation update that Assistant Director Cooper Brown gave at the last July commission meeting. And so basically the 4 originally identified priority corridors are still listed, and safety improvements are targeted and or even started on those. The piece that I think is a bit of an update is the equitable active safety improvement evaluation. And so this piece of the effort is that our goal is to create a program with ODOT funding to address pedestrian and bicycle safety in a fast, effective, and equitable manner. So this is the beginning of a initiative with consultant assistance to recommend a new program or sub-program for Oregon pedestrian bicycle safety that will implement streamlined solutions that improve safety in active transportation. Ideally, it'll determine a data-driven decision-making approach. And the step they're in right now, or that is in right now, is looking into best practices from other state departments of transportation, from the Federal Highway Administration, and standing up a peer agency review process to come up with a recommendation for this new program or sub program. So that effort is underway. And as I noted, Jessica put the whole commission presentation in your materials, if you'd like to look at that. The next piece I want to cover are some staffing updates for our division. 2 in particular that you all, I am sure, will be engaging with. So the first position that I want to announce is that effective August 9th, Robin Wilcox, and Robin's on the call, will be joining our division as the project manager for our strategic action plan efforts for the strategic action plan outcome that we public transportation division own, which is increasing equitable access to active and public transportation. So Robin's joining us. Some of you have worked with her in other efforts or when she was in parks, but Robin is joining us to project manage that whole effort. So I'm sure this committee will be hearing a lot from her going forward. So welcome to Robin. Secondly, Karen, and I think Jessica put both these announcements in the material for you to read as well. Secondly, Karen has hired a strategic planning and communications manager that will be working on our stakeholder engagement processes, our communications, our news releases, website materials, all of the above. And so that will be Kaz Zaidi, and Kaz will be starting September 1st. He comes to us by way of London originally. He's British and he worked in government in London. Most recently, he's worked with the city of Eugene on engagement efforts. And he also was a legislative aide to one of our state legislators. So he's got a lot of legislative background, stakeholder and community engagement background, and overall communications and strategic planning experience. So Kaz is going to be a great addition, and you will all, I'm sure, be meeting him as well in September. So those are some nice additions and good things to see come into play. The last piece I was going to update you all on from an ODOT perspective is that ODOT, effective July 1st of this year, 2021, has implemented an equitable engagement compensation policy, which will hopefully remove some barriers to participation in the agency's advisory efforts. This is separate from the statutory compensation that is allowed, stipend that's allowed for governor appointed committees. So it is still the same path for this committee's membership for stipends, and Jessica and I are still on it. But I will say the introduction of this policy is giving us a bit more power and influence and attention in trying to get the stipends of members that qualify. The ODOT Equitable Engagement Compensation Policy allows us to consider members of advisory committees, focus groups, technical advisory committees, policy or project advisory committees. Any participant in an effort to advise and inform ODOT's initiatives is potentially eligible for a form of compensation, be it a stipend, an incentive payment, or an engagement agreement. And we all literally just got training on this in the past couple of weeks. It's still unfolding. It has the common component that anyone who might be eligible for this compensation cannot be compensated for their time by any other agency, by their employer, whoever their employer be. But for folks who are not compensated by their employer, who do help ODOT with engagement efforts and advisory efforts, are now eligible for compensation. As I noted early on, this is different than and separate from the statute that drives governor appointed committee compensation. That one we are also still pursuing.
And to link that back to one of the items that was a follow-up in the minutes from our last meeting, talking about the bylaws and working groups, there was a question about bringing in folks who are not members of the committee to participate in subcommittee working groups, which we can do, but there was a question about, well, can that person get a stipend if they're not a member? With this new policy, we now can provide a stipend to those folks if we do bring them in for working groups. So I think that provides the committee a lot more flexibility to bring in kind of those outside subject matter experts on particular topics in the work plan. So,
and we believe, we're trying to get final confirmation on it, but it appears that the stipends and or incentives that are available through this ODOT Equitable Engagement Compensation Policy are similar to those that are in the statute that drives stipends for governor appointed committees. But we're still trying to land final yes on that from NCATRIS, but we expect that soon.
and for the current members who provided paperwork to get set up for stipends, I should have word from our HR folks on that. They were meeting today to get that finalized, so should have that ready to go, and we'll get those payments processed as soon as we can. One other quick thing to add to the staffing updates that I forgot to include in the packet outside of the public transit division is ODOT did just hire a new climate division manager. So that is Suzanne Collins, who has been running the multimodal division of Tennessee DOT for the last few years, who will be joining in that position since Amanda Peets has moved into Jerry Bohard's old position as the division administrator for PDA, Planning, Data, and Analysis Division. I'm learning my new org charts and acronyms slowly but surely. So exciting to have a new person in that role. Suzanne is originally from the Northwest, and for those of you who are familiar with Bike Works up in the Seattle area, was one of the founding members of that organization. So also has some good pedestrian, bicycle, active transportation routes. So believe that's all we had.
That's all I had.
For updates.
Yeah, great. Those are some exciting news, especially the additional funding for the pedestrian and safety efforts, which are much, much needed. Okay, so we're about 14 minutes behind, but that's okay. We're scheduled until 5, so we do have a little bit of a buffer. We'll move on to the committee business at this point, starting with the review and approval of the May minutes. So hopefully our committee members have had an opportunity to review the minutes. Does anybody have any comments? No? Should we vote on it? Can somebody make a motion?
I make a motion that we secure the minutes as written.
I
Okay,
second.
all in favor? Okay, second. I guess there's only 4 of us. All in favor? Put a thumbs up or use your reactions. Thumbs up. Okay. Okay, so I think that's unanimous. All right, that was quick. And then we have 4 areas in our work plan update. So the first one is the legislative, and Marcia actually went through the legislative update pretty thoroughly. So I have nothing to report from that regard, but I do think there is a lot of work as far as the bike bill is concerned to get agencies to recognize that this is a complete streets policy. And I think what is lacking is this acknowledgement when we do rebuild streets, that does include sidewalks and bike lanes, not as an added on feature, but as a comprehensive complete street. So I think that's where, as a committee, we need to continue to push that aspect of that policy. Next on the list is the ODOT policy adoption and implementation. So ODOT is in the process of updating their transportation safety action plan. Hopefully I got that acronym correct. They had a public comment, actually they had a open public comment period. They had a session that allowed the public to provide comments. And so as a representative of OBPAC, I worked with Emma on providing some comments on behalf of OBPAC. That is saved in today's meeting folder if you're interested in reading that update. But in general, we felt like, the TSAP update was a good step in the right direction, but it lacks the details and clarity to really make an impact in the area of safety. I think that's it in a nutshell. I don't know if Emma, if you have anything to add to that.
I think that's great. And if there's any comments or questions from Mavis or Erin. Okay. I just want to note that I put the work plan link in the chat box. So particularly for Bill and Lauren, you can look through what the committee's been up to and maybe start thinking about, as the governor confirms you, what you might want to be working on. Jeff Munson is no longer on the committee, so there's a few items that he was working on that are no longer being led by him or active. The next item that I was going to share, and this is not sharing as much content as just a reminder that we have further work to do. So we conducted outreach to the bicycle and pedestrian representatives for the area commissions on transportation that had bicycle or pedestrian or transit reps. For commissions that did not, we reached out to their executive leadership for the chair or vice chair of those active area commissions on transportation across the state. That was fantastic. I think we have some follow-up work to do to keep the conversation going and make sure that communication around walking and biking statewide is happening, particularly with some of those people we met and were engaging in conversation with. The next phase of outreach was going to focus on reaching out to the bicycle and pedestrian advisory committees at the local level, or active transportation committees, depending on how they're branded and what their scope is at the different community scales. This could be county, city, regional, depending on how it's kind of structured across the state. And then Hal and I were part of a communication discussion led by a consultant that ODOT had hired with the different modal committees. And I think that there's a lot of great work to be done reaching out and collaborating across the modal committees. I recently heard from talking with a member of the Public Transportation Advisory Committee that they're going through some planning work. I think Michael Black might be our representative on that, but they're trying to bring in some of the different modal committee representatives. So just interested in keeping this on our radar. I don't have a ton of capacity to vote to it right now, but I think moving into fall would be a really great time to kind of put our next phase of planning in place and start taking actions on that. You know, Erin, you'd expressed interest, so maybe we can reconnect at some point and start formulating the plans and moving things forward more.
Great, thanks, Emma. Expand funding policy and programs. Jessica, your name is here listed by the 24-27 STIP updates.
Yeah, so not a lot of updates to provide since our overview that Susan provided last time you got together, other than well, I guess just to give Bill and Lauren a little bit of the background, the State Transportation Improvement Program, that is our capital project list that we develop every 2 to 3 years that includes everything that is federally funded in the state. We develop that a few years ahead of when we kick off developing any of those projects, and are currently working on developing the 2024 to 27 STIP. And in that, that program, the Oregon Transportation Commission this time around decided to give public and active transportation $255 million in funding, which is a $60 million increase from what we had in the 21-24 STIP. And $55 million of that public and active transportation is allocated for 2 programs that are called Ped Bike Strategic. So trying to strategically use our funding and our active transportation needs inventory. That's a management system we just developed statewide to invest in the highest need locations on the ODOT system in the state using a real data-driven approach. So that is $45 million for that program. And then we've also got $10 million set aside specifically for safe routes to school improvements on ODOT system. So at the staff level, we have been working with the ODOT regions and with the active transportation needs inventory data pretty frantically, coming up with our draft 150% list of projects that we think meet the criteria for that program so that we can start to scope them. We've been looking a lot at how can we leverage other programs across ODOT, so we're not all working in silos, but we're getting the most bang for our buck and getting addressing all of the issues when we have a project in an area. And with the growth of our ADA program to address all of our curb ramp and compliance issues on the state system, we have been having some really, really exciting, fruitful conversations with that program about leveraging funds so that the ADA program is kind of prioritizing some of the corridors that are higher priority for active transportation generally. And while they do those curb ramps, we're also contributing funding so that we are getting all of the sidewalk gaps filled in while we're out there, so that we're looking at some roadway reallocations to fill in the bike lane gaps and address some safety issues, and trying to see how we can combine those funds to, you know, get these bigger package of safety and active transportation improvements. So we're working on that. We have in the agenda, there is, and I will put it in the chat real quick, a link to our, okay, I will put it in a little later when my mouse is obeying me. But there's a link to the new website for the Ped Bike Strategic Program that kind of gives the overview of how that program is running, how we're setting it up. And there will also be some information there and that I will share with the committee, and we'll be doing a big outreach push on for a virtual open house we're going to be hosting in September to show here's what we came up with for our 150% list for projects for this program. Does this look like the right list? If there is a project in your community, asking for feedback from folks in the community of, so we know there's a need here. Here's kind of what we think might be a solution. What do you think as the local community member who knows this place better is the actual fix that is needed there? So we'll be doing that kind of outreach going forward. And since you all have done your coordination meeting with the ACTS, we also have been, you probably want to know that we also have been doing the road show and going to each and every one of the area commissions on transportation around the state to get them up to speed on the program and get their feedback. So that's it for STIP.
Great, thanks for that update, Jessica. Looking forward to hearing more STIP updates in our upcoming meetings. All right, organizational health, bylaws update. Aaron, do you have any updates for the committee?
Yeah, well, I took the feedback from everyone and put into a draft and then a final, if everyone is okay with the changes. The one that's highlighted is all the changes that I've made in case Bill and Lauren want to see what it was before. And then I put in a final draft, what it would look like if all of those changes look good. And I don't know, does everyone feel okay with voting on it to hopefully update those already?
So just to confirm, Aaron, the final is just the track changes without the highlights and okay.
Yeah, basically.
Thank you so much for your work on this.
Yeah, I just cleaned it up, what it would look like final, but the highlighted one shows all the changes.
So I put the link in the chat for folks if they want to pull that up, and Jessica is also pulling it up here. So do members feel like we are ready to vote on our updated bylaws? And I just want to acknowledge that at any point in the future, we can also update to, you know, maybe we do this like every 2 years, just a review of the bylaws. So if we don't get the changes that we want in now, there will be an opportunity in the future too to make more revisions. So. Okay, so do I hear a motion?
I will move to approve the proposed amendments to our committee bylaws.
I second that motion.
Okay, great. And then all in favor, give a thumbs up. Okay. Okay, I think that was unanimous. Great. Moving on to, I think we covered the, oh wait, members beginning new terms in 2021. Jessica.
Yeah, so just wanted to real quickly highlight that we've got our latest recruitment completed, but there are a lot of committee members who have terms that end in 2021. Nobody, Jeff was the only person that was going to term limit out this year, but wanted to just remind folks if their term does expire this year, to let us know if you are thinking that you might not want to re-up for another term, so that we can kind of proactively start to have the conversation about recruitment. But I know you all love it here and love this group and wouldn't think of leaving.
So Jessica, thanks for putting that document in the folder. One thing that I notice is it says term expires, but it doesn't indicate like the term number. So is this the first term, second term, etc.?
Yeah, so
So-
it's a little weird because you can do, OBPAC members are allowed to serve up to 2 full 4-year terms. But when you become a new member, the Boards and Commissions Office sets it up so that you serve out the rest of the previous member's term if, like how Elliot stepped down right before he finished up his term. Or no, he's not a good example because Lauren and Bill will both be set up with full first terms, so they'll have 8 years. But like how I think you started halfway through somebody else's term who had to step down. So you can actually kind of serve for 10 years because you've got 1 partial term and then 2 full 4-year terms.
Okay. So it looks like my Emma's term expires on the 14th of August. Michael and our terms have expired June 30th. Robert's term is expiring at the end of this year, and so is Mavis. And so we just need to let you know if we're gonna serve another term, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Or I can just assume that you're all gonna just automatically roll over into a second term. So
And actually, Aaron's term expires this year too. We're all expired.
Yeah.
Now that I look at it.
Yeah, that was something that I was
I
looking
like
at
for
the
the
bylaw.
staggering.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened, that we're all expiring the same year, but I don't know exactly how to correct that, but that might be something for the future.
Yeah, that's what we talked about, is how do we stagger our terms? Because even with Lauren and Bill, we're all going to expire at the same time, right?
Yeah, and I
Again?
don't know how this happened because the statute since 72 has been set up so that there are staggered terms of 4 people have terms that expire every 2 years. But somewhere along the line, we all got bunched up. And when I reached out to the governor's office about it, they said we basically just need to figure it out at the committee level of who wants to serve, a half term, so that we can balance things out again.
All right. I guess we don't have to worry about that until 4 more years. But go ahead, Emma.
I was curious if there's more information on the House Bill 2985, the racial, ethnic, and ability composition of committees legislation that was just passed, and what the next steps are for that for implementation, if that affects our committee directly in any way, and how we should be kind of incorporating that into our committee membership, recruitment, terming off, the full conversation.
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I followed up with Nikatris Perkins, our social equity division administrator, about that, she let me know, just like most legislation, it's probably going to be a year going through kind of the rulemaking and writing up of, okay, what does actual application of this new statute look like for the agency? For OBPAC, we did take it into consideration when we did our recruitment, and that diversity of representation and being reflective of the racial, ethnic, ability composition of Oregonians was something that was kind of on our radar before that statute. So and with the definition of ability that the governor's office and our social equity office is using, that includes, all disabilities, visible and not visible. we already meet those targets that are established in that statute. So we'll want to keep it in mind when we have future recruitments, but it won't have any immediate impacts on the composition of this
And for
group.
other ODOT committees that aren't in compliance, it'll be like a year out before the rules are probably in place,
Probably.
and then guiding them on how to shift accordingly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll just say that I would like to continue serving on OBPAC for another term. I don't know if I was a partial term to start or whether it was a first full term. Do you happen to remember, Jessica? I think it might be partial because I have trouble believing I've been on here 4 years.
Yeah, I think yours was a partial. I think you, Hal, and Robert were both partials when you started. But everyone on the list is only finishing up their first official term.
I think I'm a.
If it would
partial
help
too,
with this,
right, Jessica.
Hmm?
Aren't I filling out Cadell's term? Because I've only been here for 2 years. So I'm also
Yep.
partial currently.
So I think it would be helpful,
Since
even
I
with the
was-
partial, if we can just indicate like that is the first term or partial term, right? I think that would help because I think I'm completing my first term.
Yeah, I can send it. I have a different document that has, the specific term dates. I just didn't put it in the packet because it's
Okay.
also got people's mailing addresses and phone numbers and things like
Sure.
that. And I didn't want to put that in the packet, but I'll email that to everyone because I think you all have each other's phone numbers anyways. How about that?
Great, that would be
if it
helpful.
would be helpful to help with the staggering, we could maybe look back to when I started and have that be like 4 years from that date and have that be my first term, and then I could have a chance to renew after that. I'm happy to be one of the flexible people if we're trying to get on a staggered schedule.
Okay, and I can kind of look at that for folks who started with the staggered. If we just considered that your first term, how would that smooth things out? So I'll do some work on it and send it out to the committee.
Great. And so the last item is the election. Are you all ready for the election?
Well,
Is
I did
anybody
want to
running?
say I wasn't here last meeting I don't know if this was on the agenda, if it was talked about. So I'm currently vice chair, but I am feeling pretty spread thin on a lot of different fronts. So if anyone else would like to be vice chair for the next year, I'd be happy to open it up to anyone who wants to be. I could see myself stepping back into it later. I know Mavis has been vice chair before. Erin's awesome. I don't know if Robert or Michael would be interested. They're not here today. And unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to connect with them ahead of time. But just want to put that out there before we start nominating and voting and all that.
Emma took my speech. I was going to say, if anybody wants to be chair, feel free to step up.
And we can also delay this until the next meeting when everybody's able to attend, if that.
Yeah, that
More
feels
comfortable.
better. It just feels like we don't have a full committee, and it doesn't feel right to have an election or think about who to nominate without all of our members here. So, and then hopefully by the next meeting, we'll have Bill and Lauren too.
All right, if it's okay with everybody on the committee, then I will just move that back to your next agenda in September.
Sounds good. Wow, so we've made up our time. We're all caught up. It's 2:07 and our break is at 2:15. Should we take a break? Okay, I see
Can you come back
Mavis.
at 2:20?
Sure,
Should
why don't we
resuming
come
at
back
2:20
5
work?
minutes early? Yep. So come back at 2:20 and we will, Jessica will kick it off with her SWIP presentation and discussion.
Jessica, I'm curious where in Minnesota you were from?
So I grew up in Red Wing,
Red Wing.
About 45 minutes south of Minneapolis, St.
Oh,
Paul.
I know it well.
And then I finished up high school in International Falls.
Oh,
So
so
heart
you
of
were in the
Oberstar
8th
country.
district. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's great.
It's actually yeah, kind of some of the work that Oberstar was doing that got me interested in going back to school for planning.
Yeah,
Yep.
exciting.
Yeah. So I went to Macalester for undergrad, and then I went to the Humphrey Institute for grad school.
Uh-huh. My wife is a Macalester grad. What is your Minnesota connection? Where were you from?
I grew up in Bloomington, Minnesota.
Bloomington.
Yeah. And then I got my undergrad at the University of Minnesota. And as an undergrad, I worked at the Center for Transportation Studies, and Jim Oberstar was a huge supporter of that center and was vital in getting federal funds to help that center out for a number of years. So.
And one of his greatest accomplishments was safe routes to school.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, Robert Spurlock, who is not here, is also a Macalester graduate. So we have these like Minnesota connections. It's really quite interesting.
Yeah, Robert and I overlapped by a year, and we had, I don't know, we were in the same GIS lab at some point at Macalester. And when I moved out to Oregon, I don't know, at least 5 years later, I was a consultant working on the Tigard Greenway Trails plan. And there was this guy in the technical advisory committee that was just like, I know you from somewhere. I've stared at you across the room before. And it was Robert. It took us a while to make that connection.
Great. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Am I in the right place? Is this the Minnesota BPAC or the Oregon? Feel surrounded by Minnesotans.
Yeah, it's so wild how we all ended up like on the same committee. So maybe it says something about us. All right, are we all ready to start? I think.
Maybe can you hear us?
Yes. So Jessica, you're up. I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Well then, this is kind of our big action for today's meeting, and this is bringing back a topic that we started to cover at your last meeting in May, the 2021 to 24 Sidewalk Improvement Program Strategic Funding Proposal. And I'll kind of go over some of the basics again as a refresher for everyone, and to get Bill and Lauren up to speed. But just a survey of folks. How many of you had a chance to look at the worksheet and the scenarios in this PowerPoint prior to the meeting?
I did. I was not here last time, so
okay.
This is my first meeting that I'm engaging on this material.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for taking a look at it. So to give a little bit of background, so SWIP, the Sidewalk Improvement Program, is a program that I manage at ODOT, and it is a set aside of state highway funds for bicycle and pedestrian improvements on or along state highways. And this has historically been about 3.7 million a year, starting in 21-24, when we developed the STIP. The agency decided to increase the budget for the SWIP program to what we were estimating as 1% of our state highway fund revenues, so that per the bike bill, we are required to spend a minimum of 1% of, well, ODOT, cities and counties, anyone who receives state highway fund revenues is required to spend at least 1% of that on walking and biking improvements. So with this change in 21-24, ODOT is now making sure that we meet that minimum threshold with one line item in our budget. So that we're not trying to cobble together safe routes and ADA and what did we spend in a larger project to see if we got to 1%. We've got one line item, and all those other things that we're spending money on for ped bike improvements is over and above that minimum requirement. So I love this change. It it makes our reporting a lot easier. So in this first round where we did that, 21-24, we decided to keep the amount of SWIP that we allocate to the 5 ODOT regions by formula, just give that a small increase. So 4.2 million a year, a little over half, is going out to the regions using this table down here. That is a target percentage that's based on the miles of sidewalk and bike lane gaps you have on ODOT highways in your region. So that's 75% of the formula. And then 25% of it is the population. So that we have kind of an even amount. So each year, region 1 and 2 get about $1 million a year. Region 3 through 5 get a little over $500,000. In 21-24, we also set aside all the new money that we got in the STIP for 3.2 million a year for what we were calling the SWIP strategic program. So the goal of that, it's a one-time program in the 21-24 STIP, because in 24-27, we've now got our new $55 million in federal funding to do larger, more strategic investments. This 3.2 million a year in 21-24 was our first stab at setting aside some funding for strategic investments that do what our other ped bike program investments do, of helping to complete our walking and biking network on our highways so that we're improving performance on our key performance measure. But also, like, setting aside funds specifically to get some of those big ticket items that are gonna knock off projects that are really high scoring in the active transportation needs inventory, but that the regions couldn't fund on their own with that $500,000 a year that they're getting from their SWIP region allocation. The other thing that we have decided to use these funds for when we set it up was to provide our grant match to leverage other programs like Safe Routes to School and the Federal Lands Access Program, because Safe Routes to School, ODOT is an eligible applicant, but we have to provide a 40% match if we get those grants. So we just offered to pay that match out of this fund so that it didn't have to come out of the region budgets, and people got more excited and applied for more projects from Safe Routes to School that way. So we are into the second fiscal year of the 21-24 STIP, and we have wrapped up our Safe Routes to School grant solicitation, and thus far have spent 3.4 million of this fund on grant matches for projects that were selected for funding through the 2020 Safe Routes to School infrastructure grant program, and also provided matches for a couple of Safe Routes to School rapid response grants. So those are those up to $500,000 grants that are in between Safe Routes to School grant cycles if there's a crash or something, some unforeseen circumstance that the community couldn't have anticipated. So we've provided some match for that as well. So we have 6.2 million left in our SWIP strategic pot for 21-24 to allocate. And that's what we talked about last time. New development since May is that we have June 30th was the end of the fiscal year and also the end of a biennium, which is how ODOT does a lot of its budgeting. So we've I have sat down with our funding folks and balanced all of our programmatic checkbooks and closed out a lot of projects that have been kind of sitting on the books waiting for final voucher and things like that. And a lot of those we've had some project savings when we closed out. Didn't quite spend our full budget. We also had a program called Quick Fix that was for small immediate maintenance fixes on ODOT system that we've got some unspent budget for. And altogether, it's a pretty big couch to pull pennies out of, so it adds up pretty quickly. We've got 3.8 million in additional funding that is in what we call the program's bottom line. So that's where all of our savings and everything go to, that we could dip into and allocate up to $10 million in projects through this process for getting projects constructed in 21-24. So that's a new development since we talked in May. The other thing that we've done based on the conversation in May, thank you all for the feedback. It was really helpful, and I think has really made this process a lot more robust and high quality. We have taken a look at both the list of projects that we were looking at for potential funding through this program and how are we screening those. So we're still looking at, we asked the regions for their project lists. We went through our other funding programs and looked at what scored really high but didn't quite make the cut. But we added some lenses of looking at how do these projects score from an equity perspective using the Transportation Disadvantaged Index that is in the Active Transportation Needs Inventory and that we use for the Community Paths program. Bill and Lauren, for your background, the Transportation Disadvantaged Index is a tool that we came up with. It's basically compiling a lot of census data to determine where are areas where there's a lot more low income, elderly, senior youth, communities of color, households without access to a car, basically places where we know that there's more likely to be more people dependent upon walking, biking, and transit to meet their daily needs, and probably places where we've been more likely to have some systemic disinvestment historically. So took a look at all these from an equity lens. Also looked at them from readiness and staff capacity. There are some projects that, score really high and we'd like to be able to construct, but when we talk to the regions, even if we had the money, there's just not enough staff to be able to design and bid and get the project built in 21-24. So we looked at that. Added a new lens of looking at safety based on the feedback that prioritizing safety corridors was something the committee was really interested in. There, for that $10 million from OTC for rapid response pedestrian improvements, there were top 10 pedestrian safety corridors that were identified. Regions came up with potential rapid response projects for each of those corridors, but we were only able to fund 4 of those corridors with that 10 million. So we've added the unfunded projects to the list for consideration and looked at what scores in the top 10% on the Active Transportation Needs Inventory. So in that project spreadsheet that is in your packet, there's the column for each of those different criteria: the Active Transportation Needs Inventory, safety, and the equity score that highlights in green if it's in the top 10% of the needs inventory, if it's one of those top 10 pedestrian corridors, and if it's in the top 20% of the Transportation Disadvantaged Index. The ones that are in yellow are still in important areas. They just didn't meet that cutoff that we established. So that's how we've reassessed the screening process for these. And then also kind of tried to come up with, well, we've got 10 projects on this list that are more than we have available for SWIP Strategic. What are some different scenarios to as food for thought for how we could allocate these funds differently? So the first one we came up with was really looking at leverage and opportunities that might not be available later if we don't fund it now, and a little bit of a geographic distribution lens. So if we were to fund the top priority one priority project in each region as identified by ODOT staff, that would be about 6.3 million in projects that we fund. So a little over that SWIP strategic budget. It would get us 3 million, that 3 million towards the 82nd Avenue jurisdictional transfer in Region 1, some sidewalk infill and crossings in Alsea, a small community in Region 2, road diet and crossing improvement on US 101 on the coast in Brookings, a undercrossing in Tumalo, smaller community near Bend in Region 4. This is a collaborative leverage opportunity with Deschutes County to create an undercrossing that would improve connections across the highway for a smaller community and also for a scenic bikeway. And leveraging an ADA project in Joseph in Region 5 to do some sidewalk infill. There's a curb ramp project there right now where we have an opportunity to provide some additional funding to build the sidewalk from downtown to connect out to a shared use path that we recently constructed that goes out to Alawa Lake, connects to some tribally significant destinations out there. So that's 6.3 million in projects in this scenario that we would get constructed in 21-24. And then we would have 3.5 million left, still that same program bottom line that we could draw from for grant match for the Safe Routes to School solicitation that's going to happen next. I can't remember now if it's going to be 2022 or 2023, but the next round of Safe Routes to School grants, ODOT will not be putting in applications and competing for those funds, but we do have local communities that have projects that they want to put in that involve ODOT right away. So it's really nice for us to be able to provide that match to support that. And we could also use those funds for additional ADA curb ramp project leverage for ADA projects that come out in 2022 and 23. And then anything else that we don't fund in that list of 10 projects in this scenario, we have on our list for the 24-27 STIP to consider for funding with federal funds. And this chart in the corner just kind of shows the breakdown by region. You'd have a little bit more funding going to Region 1, but a pretty good distribution for the rest of the regions. So scenario 2, really looking at prioritizing those pedestrian safety corridors that were not funded by that $10 million from OTC. So this would be about 6.2 million in projects funded in 21-24, and a little bit more in that, so not quite, no, that's exactly spending our SWIP strategic budget and keeping all of the bottom line for those grant matches and ADA project leverage. You may notice that this does not include every single one of those pedestrian safety corridors that wasn't funded, that was on the OTC list. And that's because of that staff capacity restriction that I mentioned. So of the top 10 pedestrian safety corridors that were identified, 6 of them are in Region 1. And really, they just don't have enough staff capacity to deliver more than the additional McLaughlin 99E project. So this would be 3 million for 82nd, $1 million for rapid response pedestrian safety improvements on McLaughlin Boulevard in Clackamas County. An additional 1.2 million for 126B Main Street in Springfield for illumination. That corridor has some funding through the pedestrian rapid response, 10 million for some illumination improvements, but those are just the ones that we could fit on existing poles. This extra money would be the build out the full plan, put in the new poles and do illumination along the whole corridor. And again, the 101 Brookings project. So with this scenario, you get a lot more investment in Region 1, 2, and 3. There are not any pedestrian safety priority corridors in Region 4 or 5, though. And you also would lose the opportunity to fund those 2 leverage projects in Tumalo and in Joseph, if you don't fund those in this round. So there's maybe some hybrids of this scenario the committee might want to discuss of, well, you could add those 2 projects back in. Yeah, that's what the whole discussion part of this is for. So that's scenario 2, that's really centering that safety piece. And then third is kind of the go all in, spend as much money, take all the SWIP strategic funds, all of our bottom line funds, and spend as much as we can to get as much project construction out the door in 21-24 as we can. Because basically every year that we wait to deliver a project, it gets more, we have about 4 to 7% increase in construction costs and inflation. So this just kind of is the all in, maximize the bang for your buck scenario, where you would fund every single one of the projects on that spreadsheet, except for the South Corvallis project, which still has some planning and engineering approvals to go through. So we'd save that one for the 24-27 STIP. And you would also take the $3 million for 82nd Avenue's jurisdictional transfer out of the 24-27 dollars rather than out of these immediate state dollars. So very, very limited emergency reserve. So we wouldn't have a lot of flexibility to provide grant match for local jurisdictions or leverage other ADA curb ramp projects in the short term. But yeah, you get a lot of money out the door. You have a pretty good balance of funding across regions, with Region 4 really peaking in this one because you would be funding the Safe Routes to School project in Keno that is $3.6 million. So it's a larger project than a lot of the other ones. This is a community that doesn't currently have any sidewalks in it. It's pretty close to Klamath Falls for folks who don't know where Little Keno is. So this would be a little bit more major project for that community. So those are the 3 scenarios that we came up with just for discussion at the staff level. There is, hopefully these instructions made sense to folks, but the spreadsheet is set up so that we can just, as you talk through, if you want to see, if we add this project, take out this project, what do the totals look like? We can really easily do that. But with that, I'm going to stop talking and open it up for discussion. And we also have some comments from Robert on his thoughts on these scenarios that he was able to provide that we could share in discussion. So any questions?
I'd love to start by just hearing Robert's thoughts that he provided. If you have those ready.
Yeah, let me just stop sharing for a second so I can pull them up in my email. Okay, so Robert's comments are, I think the most important thing is to fund all the projects that performed best in the screening process, referring to columns D through F in the spreadsheet that show cells shaded in either green or yellow. Projects where all three columns are green should be funded. These are 82nd in Portland, McLaughlin in Clackamas County, and US 101 in Brookings. By the same logic, I would also add Main Street in Springfield to the list because it's the only project where 2 out of 3 columns are green. Hasn't read a compelling argument for scenario 1 of funding a priority project in each region. He doesn't think that the idea of regional parity should trump the screening process's emphasis on equity, safety, and the ATNI score. Unless he's mistaken, this is statewide funding, not regional funding, so it should go to statewide priorities, not regional priorities. He's supportive of retaining the bottom line for Safe Routes to School grant match and ADA project leverage. So taken together, comments he's provided leads him to support funding scenario 2. How?
So I have some comments. I actually do also support Robert's perspective that we do need to prioritize, and one of the ways that we prioritize was suggesting the ATNI safety and equity. And so I do support that. I actually have another proposal on the table. I think we can achieve both 1 and 2 by funding every project except for Oregon 99 West and Oregon 66, which can be funded in the next STIP cycle, I believe, for the 24-27 funding, which leaves a balance of $739,000 for the Safe Routes to School matching program. And this gets at what Jessica was saying, you were saying earlier, in that, you know, these projects are ready to go. And so we should try to fund as many high priority projects. The reason for leaving the other 2 projects to be funded in the 24-27 STIP is they don't come up as high as the priority as far as safety and equity, as well as the ATNI. They're not green. So. But that proposal, you get projects in each region, as well as funding the top safety projects, equity projects, and ATNI projects.
How could we adjust the spreadsheet to reflect what you're suggesting so we can just see it on the screen, please?
So yeah, if Jessica can share her screen and that spreadsheet.
Yeah, I'm just working on that one. I had a older version of it open. So with house, okay, why is this not letting me edit? Were you all able to edit this?
I had to download it to edit.
Okay. Discuss amongst yourselves. Let me just open the version that is on my hard drive so it's easier. Any other?
It seems to be letting me edit, so I could try to mock it up.
I can,
this is working.
If you let me share the screen, I have an Excel spreadsheet of it up. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
So basically, and hopefully I did it right. So I placed an X in the projects to be funded. And so it leaves a bottom line balance of 739,000. And I think if I read the notes correctly, these two projects are on the table to currently plan for the 24-27. So, it is planned for funding already. And then if I scroll over to column A, you'll see that every region will have at least a project, right?
If you go over to the bottom right, there's the funding by region, which kind of gives a sense of that.
Yeah. So.
Yep.
But it does address, as you can see, like with these projects, these two projects are all yellow in all of the 3 columns where those items were being used as the priority projects. And to be clear, I think all of these projects are worthy of funding, but I was just trying to balance some of these like priorities that we discussed. So.
Yeah, I like it. Mavis or Aaron, do you have thoughts? Or scenarios that you preferred? Or variations on scenarios?
I'm all in. I personally like spending all the money, so I went for 3. But I like Hal's option. Of course, I don't like the funding number 2 because it's very much not my side of the state. So I like 1 or 3. I like 3 because, well, spending money is fun. And then I like Hal's option.
My option has 1.5, both projects in Region 5 funded.
Walk me through why we don't want to spend all of our money, because that is totally where I go. Why would option 3 not be intelligent?
Because we're not funding the 82nd, right? Out of that option, Jessica, was that the proposal?
Well, that funding would just come out of the 24-27 strategic pot if we don't take it out of this one.
And to be honest with you, I feel like that was such a priority, and there were press releases shared with the public, and to sort of walk back on that and not fund it until 24-27.
So I should clarify on that one. This is for the jurisdictional transfer. This is above and beyond the 3.3 million in the ped safety funds that have already been allocated for 82nd. So realistically speaking, that money might not actually start to get spent until the end of 21-24, because there is a chunk of money already allocated to the corridor. But
and so Mavis, I think the other thing for 3 is that project also meets all of the 3 criteria that is being scored. So overall, it's top 10% with the segments in the top 1%, number 2 in pedestrian safety in the top 20% as far as the transportation. I don't know, I can't remember what TDI stands for, but the equity score. And so to me, like, we've been talking about, like, we should be fixing these dangerous roadways, and this one, like scenario 3, just will not fund that until later on. So
I see what you're going for, and I understand it. I also look at it and go, that project is already getting so much money, and the funds we're looking at giving to it are above and beyond that. Yeah. Anyway, and inflation is coming, so spend your money now. What do you think, Aaron? I'm done.
You want me to share, Emma, or do you want to go first? I am kind of in the same boat as Mavis. I think when I saw the funding scenarios, I really like scenario 3, just because, we get as much money out the door as possible and really try to get as many projects funded and started right now. because a year or 2 or 3 years is a long time to wait for a project to be funded, and it could make a really big difference. And I also really liked how there was more projects in regions 4 and 5 funded. Some of those smaller communities like Keno, coming from a small town, I know, what difference, a project like that can make, and, what an uplift for the community that is. So I was definitely, my favorite was definitely funding scenario 3, but I also like Howe's alternative of trying to prioritize the parameters that we had set and that staff had, recognized, like these are key things that we're looking for, and these are things that rank highly. But I also understand that maybe those smaller communities don't always score high in those categories just because there's not that volume there. The amount of people using those facilities is not the same as in a big city like Portland. So
I like the general direction we're heading. I also was kind of in favor of the 3 general direction or Howe and Roberts proposal. One potential concern with Howe and Roberts proposal is I'm curious what the safety corridor ranking is informed by and what the time period is. I'm recalling that there were at least one, but maybe more fatal crashes in South Corvallis, and I'm not sure if this project would actually be addressing the area that I'm thinking of with recent fatalities, and I don't know if those recent fatalities are accounted for in the safety column we're looking at or not.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So how the top 10 pedestrian safety corridor list that we're looking at was developed was based on 7, let's see. There's a formula, and I haven't thought about it I've already started to repress the memory. So it is based largely off of the ATNI safety and equity factors, and then also has recent pedestrian fatalities factored into it as well, because there is about a 3-year lag between when a crash happens and when it is in ODOT's official processed, ready to use crash data. So it is 25% based on the crash history in the official data, 25% based on the recent pedestrian fatalities, 25% equity transportation disadvantage score, and 25% systemic pedestrian safety risk factors is what went into identifying those. So summing all those up and looking at which segments highways in a city score the highest.
So when you say more recent, is that 2018 and more recent, or what does the more recent consist of?
It is, I believe, our official crash data that we had in the ATNI only went to the end of 2018. So the more recent was looking at any fatals that were reported between the 1st of January 2019 to April 1st of this year.
Okay, thank you.
So there were a couple
I guess
fatals
I'm
on
just
99 that were accounted for in that.
okay. It seems a little bit weird that it's not applicable in the safety column, knowing that people have lost lives recently in that area, interstate, on that corridor. So I guess I'd be happy with funding scenario 3 or funding scenario as Hal and Robert presented it, with the addition of the Oregon 99W moving forward sooner rather than later. So that would, I think, reduce our, or does that go over? Is that spending more money than we actually have?
If
Oh,
you do
I think I was
scenario
thinking swap out. Oh, go ahead and answer.
Oh, if you do scenario 3 and add in the Corvallis project on 99, you would be 1.7 million over. Our SWIP strategic plus all of our bottom line budget.
I guess I was looking at how scenario minus 82nd, knowing that it's got $180 million in recent funding and adding in the core ballots project, but I'm not sure that that's actually where I want to go. I'm just trying to think through, should that project be built sooner rather than later? What's the work that's already funded and happening on 82nd? As I spoke earlier in this meeting, 82nd clearly is a high priority. So just trying to understand the moving parts. I know working in a local agency that there's been a lot of quick actions that are being taken, but there's also some constraints. If there's a project that says, okay, you have to deliver this by the end of September, and then the next thing that's being programmed is 2028 SIP and beyond. So just trying to right size the pieces and the funding to do the most good. So I might need to think a little bit more, but those were some of my mullings over.
Yeah, I think whatever approach we come up with, I do think that transparency and using data to drive our decision making, I think needs to be key. So I have a hard time with seeing this spreadsheet here and then saying, well, we're not going to fund the highest priority needs. We need to prioritize somehow. So that is my concern with taking a proposal and then, adding our own feelings on top of it versus trying to base it on criteria so it's more transparent to those who are participating or observing. So
totally agree with you, Hal. And I guess my point was just trying to figure out, okay, well, if we're doing a data-driven approach, what is the data that's being input into that? Is that the right data? I know looking at the description as written for the Main Street Oregon 126B project, I'm hoping that that has some flexibility because the unfunded need is actually different from the description that we're seeing. I'm hoping that it's being spent on South A Street, which is the couplet for the corridor.
So you mean the one
as
on
opposed to the 20 miles per
Corvallis?
hour.
With the one in
No,
Corvallis?
the one in Springfield.
Is it on this list? The Main Street one?
Yeah. Yeah. It's number or
5.
row 5. And so it's saying Main Street 126B, but it's actually a couplet. And I'm hoping that the descriptions for South A Street, where the posted speed 35 miles an hour versus kind of the downtown 20 miles per hour, more speed controlled section of the couplet. So there's some details that I'm just trying to think through. Okay, how can we produce the best safety benefit with the dollars available? Recognizing that this is not the only funding that's being allocated in the state. There's a lot of different moving parts and buckets that are coming in from elsewhere that aren't just the SWIP program.
Yeah, for the Main Street, the 126B one, I might have only labeled it as Main Street rather than both streets in the couplet on that stretch. That might have been my error.
Oh, things are moving quickly, which is good. It just means that we have a packet and 3 weeks later it's out of date information because more has evolved since then. So I think, where I'm at is I would like to go with the Hal Robert proposal, I'll call it, recognizing that based on Jessica's description, it sounds like the latest pedestrian fatal crashes, although they exist, they're really important. Those are lost lives of Oregonians. In the grand scheme of things, when you crunch all the data, there are higher need corridors in the rest of the list. So it is not showing as green in that column, but that just kind of points to the fact that there is so much need across the entire state and we are failing on safety. So let's move forward with, Hal's approach of look at the best information we have today, go with the green boxes, do as much good as we can as soon as we can, and continue to keep working at this because there's a lot of work to be done.
So I'm curious, Bill or Lauren, our special guests who did take the time to look at the packet. Do you have any thoughts?
I'm not sure that we're, as not being members officially, that we're allowed to vote.
You're not allowed to vote, but you are welcome to share your thoughts and opinions.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, I wasn't prepared for that.
Or you're welcome to abstain if
to abstain. Is this something that you're voting on today?
Yes, this is an item that we were hoping to vote on at the last meeting and move to this meeting. So we do need to vote on a scenario.
Yeah, I think I'm going to withhold any comments on it just because I think that could just kind of not gum up the works, but it just adds a layer that I don't think you guys need at the moment. But I appreciate the opportunity.
I feel strongly about one of the choices, but I don't feel like I am in my right to say that.
And I respect that. It's kind of a big one to jump in on. So I'm hearing from the group that we've got a bit of a split between the all-in option or I'm going to call it the safety all-in option. If that's okay with you, Hal, of the scenario 3 versus scenario 2 with some added projects.
Can we see, how can we see your spreadsheet again?
Yes, sorry, I am like moving, I have like a gazillion screens up, so.
Me too. I can't find it.
Okay, I'll share my screen again. It's not elegant, but basically the proposal is trying to fund as many projects. And actually this scenario will fund all the projects. It's just the Keno and the Southwest Corvallis will be delayed until the next STIP cycle because that funding is already allocated. Is that right, Jessica?
Though it's not allocated yet, those projects are both on the 150% list for the 24-27 STIP. So looking at this spreadsheet, the only difference between scenario 3 and the updated scenario 2 is scenario 3 funds the Keno Safe Routes to School, but does not fund 82nd Avenue jurisdictional transfer in 21-24. And this scenario, the updated scenario 2 would provide the 3 million for the 82nd jurisdictional transfer in 21-24 and hold the Keno Safe Routes to School project till 24-27. Otherwise, they are identical with the all-in on the rest of the projects besides South Corvallis.
Jessica, can you speak just a little bit more to, given all the changes that have happened with the wrapping up of the session and all the activity on 82nd, what the impact of funding with this specific funding, the 3 million for 82nd would have? Because I'm trying to trade off that benefit compared to the benefit of funding another project.
That is a really good question. What I can tell you for timeline with the 82nd Avenue funding is the 3.3 million that is going to 82nd from the 10 million for pedestrian rapid response projects is all set to be constructed this year is the goal of that program. So that would go forward regardless of scenario. With the jurisdictional transfer agreement, the City of Portland, ODOT are working on that jurisdictional transfer agreement and hoping to have an agreement drafted by the end of this year. So next year would be the earliest that that funding would be needed. But yeah, it's kind of what of that 185 million, what does it all go to and when does it get built is still a question mark that needs to be ironed out. So it's not something that we're being asked to hand over tomorrow.
I also think it's a really complicated corridor, right? Just thinking about what is needed. And so even though there is 150 or however many millions going into it, it's not all going into just like sidewalk and bicycle improvements. It is other, right?
Yeah,
there are other design
structural
aspects, right? To get it up to a certain level that can be handed over to a local agency to take on the ongoing maintenance and upkeep of it.
Yeah, so that 185 million is to bring the corridor to a full state of good repair. So that includes your pavements, your sidewalks, signs, signals, everything. ODOT is not going to be doing that work though. We've got so on Powell, ODOT is doing the work and then transferring it. On 82nd, it is we're transferring it and the city gets it and giving the money to the city so that they can do the work.
So at this point, we don't necessarily know what the difference is of this. I mean, given that there's so much happening and this is like a very small piece of the whole, I'm wondering if the small piece is actually a significant benefit and impact, or if we get all that benefit and could fund a whole nother project as well by not adding to the large pie that's already going to 82nd Avenue, which is clearly important, but I'm just trying to figure out that trade-off.
Yeah, so it's 3 million of a $70 million share that ODOT is contributing. So we still need to figure out as an agency where the additional 67 million is coming from.
So that's my question. So the 3 million is something ODOT does have to contribute to the project. So whether it comes out of this or another pot, so essentially it will be funded somehow. Is that what you're saying, Jessica?
Yeah, that's the share that ODOT's pedestrian bicycle program it has to come up with for ODOT 70 million share.
So then what would be the other sources of funding? So if it's not coming out of here and we're funding some additional projects, what doesn't get funded elsewhere?
It would come out of the 24-27 ped bike strategic pot. So it would come out of federal dollars in 2024 rather than out of state dollars prior to 2024. So it would most likely be a small project in Region 1 that does not happen with those federal dollars. In 2024.
Do we know the timing of construction? Like, is there a facility plan and preliminary engineering plan sheets already ready, or is there going to be some time dedicated to kind of queuing up the project and getting it ready? Because I wouldn't want the timing to be a constraint, but if it's not going to be an issue anyway.
I have not been involved in the details of that. We have a list of what we were looking at as potential projects on 82nd in 24-27 prior to the jurisdictional transfer becoming official, but those aren't designed or anything yet.
So can we go through it again? Emma, what are you thinking? Which of the scenarios are you leaning towards?
Great question. Great question.
So maybe this is backwards looking. Sorry, Emma. So I'm going to give you a moment to think. So Jessica, how did these projects make it to the list
Oh, yeah. So these
in the
projects-
first place?
These projects made it to the list by looking at our Safe Routes to School and other grant programs solicitations that we've had, and seeing what are the projects that are on ODOT right-of-way that scored really high but didn't quite make the cut for funding, and looking at the pedestrian safety rapid response projects similarly that region submitted to headquarters but did not make the cut for that 10 million. Those are the new ones that were added since the May meeting. And then the Tumalo and Joseph projects were on, the priority requests from regions and communities as this is a unique leverage opportunity that had been identified. So for the most part, they're projects that were identified through other programs, but just didn't quite make the cut for funding.
Go ahead, Emma. Hopefully that gave you a second to think.
Yeah, I guess I'm still just wanting to know more project details with regards to 82nd, because clearly it's a top priority. But if our chipping in a piece from this funding source doesn't actually change the outcomes and we could fund another project, then I'd be in favor of doing more good for ped safety across the state, which I see as the funding another project, such as the South Corvallis. But if I just look at the information presented without knowing in more detail the impact to 82nd, then clearly 82nd, I mean, it has green on all three boxes. So I'd want to see that done. I just don't know if it can be a yes and, or if we have to say no to Corvallis to fully say yes to 82nd because there's some added benefit that we're kind of buying with the 3 million contribution. But if the 3 million doesn't really have a huge impact, then I want to see those dollars go elsewhere. So I don't know if we could move forward on everything except those two today, because it seems like there's a lot of support for a lot of the projects on the list with our committee, or if we need to make the complete decision today. I don't want to drag this out too long.
Yeah, I was gonna say the ones on the list that are really driving the decision schedule are those leverage opportunities that are in scenario 1 and 3, but not in 2, where we need to get back to the project managers with a go, no go. This is part of the project in the next week or so. So that's Tumalo and Joseph in region 4 and 5. it seems like those are also in the revised scenario too that you all have been discussing though. So we could, the committee could go with a kind of a vote to move forward with everything except for Keno, 82nd, and Corvallis, and staff can go back and get more information about that 82nd Avenue funding and what the implications are of funding it in 21-24 versus 24-27. So we can just discuss the trade-offs on those ones when you get together in September.
I'm actually really comfortable with that because the list that we are moving forward are those high priority projects. So
Yeah,
the higher priority projects out of all the lists.
I really like that scenario too. Just because it'd be nice to have, you know, the whole picture. I know 82nd is, you know, green in all three categories, but there's a lot of other factors to consider. If it was just given on those categories, a computer could have made this decision, and, you know, it's our, you know, input and, you know, decision making that's really, you know, trying to bring in all these different factors and make a, you know, complete decision. So I would also be comfortable with that, and I'm really agreeing with a lot of what Emma's saying.
Okay, can we vote? Which ones are we moving forward? Which ones are we waiting
I
on?
will make a motion.
Thank
So
you,
I would like
Emma.
to make a motion to move everything forward for funding with the exception of 82nd, 99W, which is the South Corvallis, and Oregon 66 Keno. And those three projects are to be discussed at our next meeting or whenever we have the information and this agenda item comes back.
Yeah, I will try to get some more information on those other ones and send it to you prior to our next meeting. So we'd have to wait till September meeting though to have an action.
So there's a motion on the floor, but within this motion, what are we going to do with those three once more information comes back? Are we like choosing one? Are we choosing two? What is the goal? Emma, sorry.
I think the goal, now that you're asking this question, I'm wondering if the Keno actually has potential for funding, or if it would be choosing either 82nd or the South Corvallis project. I'm not sure how the numbers fully total up. Let me see.
So I believe the action at September would be choosing whether to fund 82nd, Keno, or Corvallis, and then, you know, depending upon which of those to fund, how much you would have left in the bottom line reserve, or fund none of them and keep more bottom line reserve would also be an option.
I second Emma's proposal that we move forward with all of those but the three, and Jessica's going to bring back information which we will make an intelligent decision with next meeting.
Okay, so all in favor, thumbs up or thumbs down? All right, great, thanks. Motion approved.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Jessica, for your information gathering.
Yeah, it was really helpful to see it all broken down the way you did have it broken down. All right, so that took significantly longer than we expected. Next on our agenda is the strategic action plan. And Robin, I apologize for cutting into your time, but I will hand things over to you.
Sure, no problem. you all seeing that full screen now?
Yes.
Great, cool. So again, I'm Robin Wilcox. I think Marcia provided an introduction earlier that my role in ODOT will be changing in a couple weeks. So I'll be working full-time on the strategic action plan, implementing action around improving equitable access to public and active transportation for the next couple of years. For the last few months, I've already been on loan to ODOT from state parks and had been supporting some of this work moving forward. And so that's what we're gonna run through today and share with you. Really quickly, I know that you're probably already familiar with the strategic action plan, but there are three, oops, gotta remember to change the screen. There are three priorities listed in the strategic action plan and then several goals under each of these priorities. And as it says in the action plan, each of the goals is important, but really it's the interrelationship among the goals that is really the most important. So there's some overlap between these and there's some, and that's intentional in the process. Within that, there are 10 strategic outcomes identified. And the one that we're most focused on right now is the improving access to active and public transportation. So it's got some overlap across all three of those areas. We do have, this was shared with Oregon Transportation Commission in March, but so this is the plan right now that's been laid out for how we move the dial, so to speak, on the implementing action. And there's two of these that we're gonna look at closely today. So there's the developing the baseline and understanding of funding that's currently dedicated to biking and walking. And we'll give you an update on what's been done on that with the developing of the list for the dedicated funding programs. And then we've also started working on the development of an equity lens or a tool that will be utilized to implement the funding prioritization process for the existing bike and pedestrian transit improvement, transit investments that will improve access for marginalized communities. So quickly, the first item here, the program inventory. I took a look at all of the ODOT programs in transit, the pedestrian and bicycle programs, transportation options, and passenger rail. So we focused on anything related that has public funding like STIF, mass transit, vehicle replacement, the intercity transit, special transportation focuses on folks with disabilities and veterans, as well as planning and research projects. And then pedestrian and bicycle program projects that include both the STIP leverage, the community paths program, which is very new, of course, and then the Safe Routes to School project, and compiled all of that information into one database and had a few questions associated with each of those. So one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of the funds that come through ODOT are formularized, so at either a federal or a local level. And really what we're looking for here and places where we can have the most influence with regard to equity are the discretionary grant programs that ODOT funds. So this is like the STIF discretionary, some elements of the statewide transportation planning programs, STIP, Safe Routes to School, and Oregon community paths. And then within that, of course, had some, just an inventory of some basic things. One being, what is the source of the funds? How flexible are we with the method for distribution? What's the timeline and allocation method? In some cases, we combine some sources of federal funding into a singular program. What's the intended purpose? Does the program currently consider equity or have criteria associated with equity? And then where it did, talked with the program managers a little bit about any unintended consequences that had come up. And a few of those were, some programs had adjusted some of their criteria with the goal of being more equitable. And then what they ended up finding was that sometimes that adjustment actually resulted in something that was really more equal rather than equitable. Other places have found and identified that some of the challenges or unintended consequences are that there's a barrier to data collection. So it's either internal, even if local agencies could collect some of the data that we would need to inform equity on the program, there may not necessarily be folks here or at the federal level that could have the resources and time to process that data. But then more importantly, at a local level, the providers may have a hard time actually collecting the data and don't have the resources associated with it. The other piece that came out of those conversations was that it's sometimes really hard to know, like when we're looking at grant programs, whether or not the projects and the programs that are being funded are really the highest needs or highest priorities, or if they were just identified because those projects would score well in a grant process that may favor equity or whatever the criteria was of the program. And this came up particularly in regards to transit programs, but also has come up a little bit, I know in the conversations around safe routes to school projects, that sometimes it's hard to know who's actually being served versus who's kind of potentially able to be served by the program, if that makes sense. The other piece that we really focused in on with these questions was around at what level is the decision made around the criteria? So if it's a federal program where there is more leeway, but maybe ODOT's combined sources of federal funding, then do we need to make an adjustment, or could we make an adjustment? Might be a question that we would ask. If the criteria is set through statutes, a law, or a rule, then to what ability do we have to influence that? What is the timing? Obviously, a rulemaking process is a little bit more efficient in some cases than a change in statutes. And some of our criteria are set actually at the Oregon Transportation Commission level or internally or by an advisory committee. So we have a lot more opportunity to influence and change criteria at that level. And I'm just going to pause here for a second because next thing I'm going to do is shift gears over toward the equity lens. So I just want to see if folks have any questions about what's been done so far in terms of the program inventory. Okay, keep you moving. So just some quick little bit of background as we switch gears into talking about the equity lens. It's really important to understand identity. It's something that helps us honor each other as a whole, to unlearn misinformation, just to in general communicate about identity, and to try to create genuinely diverse and inclusive spaces. So one of the things that you may all be familiar with this already, the Big 8 identities, ODOT's modified that to be Big 10 identities that we focus on here. The goal is really just to establish some common language. I'm not going to read these to you all, but I do encourage you to take a look, and I'll pause to see if you have any questions. There's some other things as well that go beyond these Big 10 identities. So things like, are you a pedestrian? Are you a cyclist? Are you a public transportation user? Are you a vehicle owner? What's your veteran status? Where do you live? Do you live in a rural area, a suburban area, urban area? All of these things also play into people's identities, but are outside of and go beyond these Big 10. The other piece here to focus on is, then this came up in the PTAC conversation, the difference between equity and equality. So we get a question a lot, what is equity? Basically just acknowledging that not everyone has the same baseline to start from, that to ensure fairness and potential outcomes, that different groups and populations are going to need different levels of supports. And then also redistributing power, resource, and opportunities is one way to empower communities that have been most impacted by systemic oppression. This needs to be intentional, though. And I know that you've all seen this graphic before. But this is a graphic that really helps a lot of folks understand that difference between equity and equality. And one quote that often comes to mind for me in this type of work is, if you're all familiar with the Portland area ADA activist, Georgina Moran, she often says, "Nothing for us without us." So when we're talking about redistributing power and providing different levels of support, that can really only happen when you're working directly with the folks that have the potential to be most directly impacted. So as we're getting started through this work, developing an equity lens, some of you again may be familiar with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, GARE. So one of the first things we did was we looked at the Racial Equity Toolkit and tested this toolkit on a handful of ODOT program managers. So Leanne from Safe Routes to School and a few others were gracious enough to kind of run their programs through the series of questions, and utilizing this toolkit provided some feedback. It's basically a 6-step process that includes evaluation at the conclusion to really consider and go back to look at how well you did. We're also working, the ODOT's Office of Social Equity is working on developing an equity tool or an equity lens that can be scaled across agency projects and programs. So working closely with them on what they're putting together there. And essentially this tool is really intended to be just a series of questions that are designed to be a resource and a guide for project and program managers. And so it should be used most directly by the folks that are responsible and are closest to the programs, and help them answer these questions as they're making changes and as we're making changes. Some of the key questions from the equity lens. So again, it's a 6-step process. There's multiple questions that could be asked through that. Our process may look slightly different ultimately, but there are some key questions that we at least want to understand at a minimum. So what are the racial and social equity impacts as we increase the percentage of agency funding dedicated to projects and programs that improve equitable access to walking, biking, and transit? And with that in mind, who benefits and is burdened as we make these decisions and make modifications? And then what are the strategies to mitigate any unintended consequences? The first step in this process, desired outcomes or desired results and outcomes. This was given to us by the strategic action plan. So the ultimate desired outcome is that by the end of 2023, we increase the percentage of agency funding dedicated to projects and programs that improve equitable access to walking, biking, and transit. And we're going to begin the process with the end in mind. The second piece here is data, of course, and understanding what the data is that's available, what is the data telling us, and looking at it from a quantity and quality perspective. How much did we do? How well did we do? And is anyone really better off as a result? Also, it's important to consider whether or not we have the data or we need to create new data in order to be able to answer the question about how proposed increases in funding consider historic and current racial economic disparities. You all talked a little bit already earlier about the Transportation Disadvantaged Index, or Transportation Disadvantaged Population Index. We also have a statewide equity tool that's being used in the STIP process that is based on similar data, just modified slightly. But this is also similar to census data and track data that's been used by other agencies across the United States and other agencies in Oregon that are already looking at similar questions. So we're not only considering, what is our statewide equity data look like, but how does it relate to how other agencies are looking at it? The third piece here is around community engagement, and there's several questions up there. But two main points in these are, how have communities already been engaged? And are there opportunities to expand that engagement? And as we're building the engagement process, you know, how have we specifically included communities that will be most affected by these changes in investment? And what are we learning through the process? I think the other piece of engagement, again, this graphic just referencing the IIP2 spectrum that I think many of you may be familiar with already. But keeping in mind that at different points in time, you know, sometimes we will just be informing people. That's, you know, it's important that if the only way people have to influence the process is by just hearing about it, that you're being authentic and letting them know that that's the expectation. So it's really all about aligning expectations so that somebody doesn't come to the table and think you're asking them to participate in a collaborative process when you don't have the time or the energy for the collaborative process. There are efforts underway to kind of make this more broad and push the dial further in ODOT, but specifically in the public and active transportation division, really trying to move more towards consult and involve and collaborate where we can on these efforts. And then this fourth piece here is equity, benefits, and burdens strategies. So ultimately, with any project or any change at the end of the day, there will be some intended and unintended impacts. And it's really just being about being prepared for those impacts and being able to adjust and react and thinking through strategies around the impacts. And the questions here specifically related to this project, ultimately, like what do we need to do? What do we need to ensure that the funding increases are successful in addressing racial and social equity disparities? And again, thinking through unintended consequences and impacts to those decisions. And also asking how can we partner with stakeholders for long-term advantages in this? We can't do it all alone. The fifth piece here, implementation. So again, this comes directly from the plan, from the strategic action plan. This is shared on our website right now. There are 3 steps toward achieving this, the ultimate action here, but the 3 steps: developing the baseline, develop and implement the funding prioritization process, and then defining a priority multimodal network. And then some established timelines within that. And then finally, the last step in this process is all about transparency and accountability and building that into the process. So, you know, to that end, we're sharing with the advisory committees just the beginning stages of what's been done to date. We'll also be working with MPOs and other local jurisdictions and transit providers, stakeholders, and then looking for feedback as well about other folks that should be involved in the process. And then on the flip side, making sure that people know who they can contact with any questions or concerns throughout the process. So making sure that we're being very transparent. And then at the end, making sure that we're going back and answering the questions and doing the assessment about whether or not we achieved the desired outcomes, or at least we've set things in motion, put it on the right track. And that is the end, but I would open it up to questions and discussion from the group. Maybe you wore yourselves out.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions?
So,
Great,
Robin,
thanks, Robin. Oh, did you have something to say, Jessica?
Oh, I was just going to ask, and I should ask you this before the meeting, Robin, but what are kind of the next items that you think you'll be bringing to OBPAC for input in this process?
That's a great question, Jessica. I haven't officially started my role full time. So the initial piece that we wanted to talk with you today was just to talk through the lens and the process and see if folks had questions or comments about that. And then we'll be working towards establishing some additional timelines and check-in points along the way. But it would be great to hear folks' feedback at this stage about the questions and the process in the lens.
I guess a general comment or reflection is I feel like it's great that ODOT is pivoting and focusing more attention on equity, kind of embedding it throughout all. We have in our OBPAC work plan an item around transparency. So this also helps with our interests around transparency and just serving the state better with transportation needs and public engagement. So I don't really have a whole lot to say because I think at this point it's heading in the right direction, and that's about all I have to share at this point.
I
Okay.
personally like seeing all the bike and pedestrian stuff thrown in when you start talking about equity. I always get a little angsty when they talk about stakeholders and who you're bringing to the table and all that other kind of stuff. So that's kind of my angsty spot on the whole presentation. But yay, I think that they're going a good way. Thanks.
Mavis, can you share more of that? I don't think I quite understand. What is the angsty thing
It's
about the
the
stakeholders?
shareholder idea, because I've been involved in a couple of shareholder things, and the result is that the people that screamed the loudest and were the most
Okay.
obnoxious won, even though they were not in any way, shape, or form in the right. And
Okay.
so when you start bringing shareholders to the table and you're having these conversations and you're all on board, and then it goes somewhere else and it gets sidelined by somebody who's nasty, I hate watching things like that happen. And that's happened to a couple of our bike and ped projects here in Eastern Oregon, and it makes me angry.
Thanks for sharing. I think that context was really helpful for me to understand where that comment was coming from. All right, so we have so maybe can I get can I see hands if anybody wants like a 5-minute break before we jump into Alan's presentation? I'm trying to see if I don't have, did we lose one member? Okay, so I see Mavis and Emma and Aaron. Okay, I see it. Okay, so are you ready for Alan to present? And I think we can still get out of here fairly early, and so we can have a break at the very, very end. Alan, are you ready?
I am. Let me go ahead and do a quick share if I can find it. All right, can everyone see my presentation?
In case you can't see the nodding heads, there's a lot of nodding heads. Yes.
We can.
Good, thanks. And scrolling down. All right, so Oregon Community Pass. We were talking about strategic action plan, the outcome, improve access to active and public transportation. The OCP, I call it OCP. And let me stop right there and just say, for those in the audience who are not familiar with what the Oregon Community Pass is, it's a new competitive grant program that supports investment in walking and biking facilities that are primarily off the roadway. So almost everything that we've done before, particularly with ODOT, has been on roadway. There's been some that have been federal lands access and recreational trails, but this is the first time we've actually done it with ODOT for dedicated funding for off-roadway facilities. And this thing came together in a flash. When you say 2 years is just around the corner, it really is, because we started this in 2019, where it was established by the legislature. And by January of 2020, we completed the rulemaking. With that, we started setting up all the ingredients that would be in the OCP. We started accepting letters of intent in October of 2020. OBPAC completed the funding recommendation in March of 2021. OTC made their awards in May, and now grant agreements We have 6 of them that are at DOJ, Department of Justice, that are being evaluated. Other ones that should be finalized by the end of the week that may go straight to that are federal and below 150,000 can go straight to the applicant after that. And those are being reviewed right now and finalized. So let's go through the funding. We had $8.2 million in federal transportation alternative program funds. And we have 3.3 million in the state multimodal active transportation fund. And we added an additional 4 million at the last minute from the state transportation operating fund, which gave us a total of $15.5 million. And with that, we had 21 recommended projects throughout Oregon. These are the ones that went to the OTC and were approved. And I'm just going to go through them one by one to make it easy for everyone to see. This is Astoria Riverwalk lighting. There's already existing lighting to the west of the Maritime Museum, but there is none to the east as it goes into over towards the housing areas and along the trolley car railway. And so this is going to add additional lighting through there and allow people to better commute during dark hours to the Riverwalk area. Also allow more recreational and activities during the touristy months. So it's a great little addition that takes this facility and extends the life of it, extends the utility of it for more hours during the day and throughout the year. The next one is the Bear Creek Greenway. And what that is a bridge. The Bear Creek Greenway basically stops just before Ashland. And what this bridge will do is it's next to near a dog park. It will allow it to continue into Ashland and beyond. So it stops a barrier that will allow the Bear Creek Greenway to extend and keep on going and become a very significant regional bikeway, more so than it is already. And this one is, I like showing this one because this is a perfect example of how the Community Pass programs complements other programs such as Safe Routes to School. If you look at the light green area, this was a Safe Routes to School grant because there are no sidewalks along these roads. To build a sidewalk that then will then go up through here, to this existing path. They originally wanted to go through here, but they couldn't do it because that's not something that Safe Routes to School funds because it constitutionally has to be on the roadway. So this allows the access to the governance center and then connect to the tribal health center and to the education center. That is actually built now. That's it to the left right there. But it's a great addition to it. And it just shows how these programs all very much complement each other. This is the Newburgh-Dundee Bypass Trail, and it's building a pedestrian bridge to connect existing facilities over Hess Creek in this area. So they are actually building, the urban boundary is expanding and connecting to this area where it says Phase 1 East Limit. And so they are building this bypass that literally goes underneath, through, and along the bypass, which is an ODOT facility, a bridge over the bike pedestrian creek, and then it connects to existing facilities that are very limited use roadways, and then connects into the Newburgh area. So it's a great way of connecting two major neighborhoods. The Mill Creek Greenway. This is part of a much larger project. It's in the Dalles. It connects residential areas to downtown parks, a pool, and a senior center. This is the middle portion and the one that is the most needed, but eventually it will be 8.2 miles long. This is a project refinement study in the city of Independence. This goes from the City Hall area, which is up here, and then works its way through the park area along next to the river, just past this historic district. This road along through here, especially in the summertime, is jam-packed with tourists because it's a really cute late 19th, early 20th century downtown area. And so this allows people to access it in a safe manner and go beyond it and then connect to places south. By connecting to this road, it gets you into the road towards Corvallis. There is more development that is happening here in this area. So this will hook up with that. It's part of the city's TSP. The Tualatin River Greenway Trail Extension is 1.45 miles long. There's a trailer park here, and here's the existing greenway. And it's going to connect to the existing greenway and then go underneath Highway 99 and then connect over to this area. There's an elementary school over in this area as well. But it's a great way of linking and extending the existing Greenway River Trail. And then eventually it may extend out even further east. Corvallis to Tunison Community Bike Path. There is no real way for South Corvallis to go north into Avery Park or into the downtown area without using Highway 99. And so the idea is to build this either along the railway right-of-way or possibly along Allen Avenue. And then that will get to Avery Park and then connect up to some trails that are along Marys River that they can then get into the downtown area. Warrenton Tansy Point, this is a connection that connects to a roadway that then goes towards the Fort Stevens historical area. This goes to the backside of a KOA parking lot. And they're looking at how they can extend it to the road to these existing pathways as well. So that will then allow connections for people coming up and down, and people who work in this area can use it for commuting, and in this area for commuting, as well as for people who are recreating at Fort Stevens. Allows them to get there if they live in the Warrenton area. It allows them to get there without having to drive and park. The Hermiston Belt Greenway goes from a lower income apartment complex in this area through these two little park areas. There is a middle school right here, and then just off to the right is a high school as well. So it allows off-roadway connections from the Butter Creek apartment area to the schools. Eugene Berkeley Bike Path. This one connects to the Fern Ridge Trail, and you can see how big the Fern Ridge Trail is to the left. The map of it just shows how far it goes, and the arrow points to the project location. The only way to normally access it would be along Oak Patch Road, and then there's another road over here. This one is the back of is walled off. They have revamped the park, and they're wanting to put this in here. There are already some worn paths right now, but in this area, it's more of a swamp and tidelands area that needs some work to be able to access it either by pedestrian or walking or biking. Tualatin Hills, the West Side Trail. This is another project refinement study looking at how best to connect the areas up towards the top of this map down south. It's about 3 miles if I remember, and allows them to connect to these park areas and all the other facilities. So this is a project refinement, and it shows how the project refinement can be used to extend existing facilities in new ways. This is Madras Juniper Hills Park connection. There are some phenomenal recreational areas to the east of Madras in the mountains area. Then next to the city itself is the Juniper Hills Park and some east trails. And what this does is allows the park to be able to go through on their existing facilities and then connect across the street and go over to the Madras East trails, as you can see here, and connect that recreational area to the city and to the park itself. So it's a great way of thinking that this connects to here, connects to the city, that then connects to the Madras Mountains, if I remember the name correctly, I'm sorry, to the west of there. The Ontario North-South Connector, this is a project refinement grant. They have already started something up in the top at a crossing next to the interstate. And they have something that goes across the river into Idaho. And what they're looking at is they want to connect this top part all the way down to the bottom part. So this is a project refinement study, basically a corridor study to look at what can be done to connect the north part of the city to the south part that will then connect to existing facilities and planned facilities that will go east and cross the bridge over across the Snake River. And to the greatest extent possible, the pictures that I'm showing you are from the area that I'm aware of. If they did not provide it, then I did some searching of the areas to find those pictures. So this is Chilokeen Healthy and Safe Connections. This is one where it connects down south. And this map does not show it, but this trail actually goes all the way down along the river bend to, down the railroad right of way, and then goes south along the river and then back up towards the school. I don't know why that didn't cross over when I transferred it over, but it's a big triangle shape going down and then back up again. So it's a great way of connecting to the rail, the river, and then being able to cross at that point, as well as to the elementary school. Washington County Reedville Trail. This one is complete missing sections of the trail and repave existing systems. As you can see on the top of this area here and this area here are both in need of repair. The Benton County Pilkington to Merloy, that's Corvallis to Albany. It's 10.9 miles. This is just one section of it. It's just a little over a mile going from Pilkington Avenue to Merloy Avenue. And it's to do a off roadway. It's not going to be on the roadway right away, but it's going to be next to the roadway right away, as what they're hoping will be an eventual longer term section or path going between the two cities. LeGrand is looking at the Eastern Oregon University bikeway planning for connecting the university to points south. This is one of their proposals, but the idea is how do they connect the university to the houses and residential areas to the south, and what's the best way to do it? So that's looking at of course at off roadway planning. Happy Valley Scott Trail, it's revamping some of the trail that has fallen into decay, and to build a new trail, but then it will eventually connect up to existing trails. So you can see the two areas that are being used, and it will be just an absolute phenomenal trail. That's the Scott Creek Mountain Trail, if I remember correctly. There's different phases of depending on how you look at it on the internet. The other one is Medford Larson Creek Path repaving. As you can see from these pictures, it is in a very poor state and needs to be not only repaved, but also widened to meet current ADA. So that's what they're looking to do. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions.
Love the pictures. The photo on the slide that you have with Steve in Fort Stevens, that's me riding with my child at the time. And that kid is 18 years old. Yeah. I'm like, wait a second. I think that's so very old photo.
Yeah, understood. When I was in graduate school, I saw myself on the History Channel and had an instant midlife crisis. And I wasn't
Great. That was a great presentation. And then I don't know if you saw, but Jessica, did you send out a survey too for us to fill out for the community paths?
Yes, we have a survey. So this is the celebration point. And what we're doing is we're doing a survey to say, all right, we got this thing out there. We're super, super happy, but we also know how can we improve it? This is the first cycle. So this is where we can really fine tune it and improve the process for cycle 2, which starts in 2023. So the idea is let's find out where it could have been done a little bit better, or where it could have been done a little bit different, and then start tweaking it together over the course of the next 2 years, and come up with a really good program for cycle 2. So
And remind us when the survey is due.
yes, we're asking for it by August 20th, and then if Jessica will get me on the schedule, I will start putting up on the quote unquote the lessons learned.
Thanks, Ellen. Did anybody else have any comments or questions? Emma's clapping, Ellen, if you can't see.
I can see, but that's not for
Okay.
me. That's for everybody.
Appreciate the
Oh, we really
photos and
appreciate
the time to put this presentation together. I think it's really helpful to help make it
Yeah.
real in our eyes. So Mavis, thanks for the request. Alan, thanks
Yeah.
for delivering on the request.
Yeah, thank you for asking for this, Mavis, because I think this committee and Alan have worked really hard over the last year and a half to make this program possible, and it's really awesome to see the fruits of your labor laid out like this. And we definitely will be doing some site visits as things start to get built, so can see it firsthand once we get back to travel meetings as well.
Yeah, I was really excited when I started seeing the photos. I'm like, oh, I gotta note that. If I visit that town, I'm gonna have to ride that path. All right, so that takes us to 4 o'clock, and we can do a roundtable on the not on agenda items. So I will open it up to anybody that has anything that they want to share. Also, our guests and visitors too. Feel free to. Anyone? Oh, Mavis.
So I've been going to the Safe Routes to School, and we're getting ready we're doing the lenses for the next round of funding and all that good stuff. And of course, I represent you guys there. So you want me to say anything, or am I just going with filling in the sidewalks, which has been my theme for a while?
I feel like the program works pretty well. It's had a lot of effort put into setting it up well, and now it's just a matter of putting as much money through the system as possible to make the goodness happen.
Well, particularly right now, we're focusing on lenses, and so equity is one of them. They're really focused on the Title I schools. We put in a lot of rapid flashing beacons, which I prefer sidewalks, but I'm just that way. So I keep pushing that, everything within that nebula of the school, filling in the sidewalks so kids can walk, those kind of things. That's what I have been pushing through you guys. Is there anything else I need to be paying attention to that you guys can think of?
Does that include actually putting stuff where some communities have nothing? So
yes.
Is that included? Okay. And I think you got it covered.
Okay.
Leanne, since you're on the line, did you have anything else you wanted to provide in terms of Safe Routes to School updates?
Not that I can think of. Mavis kind of covered it. Where we're working on the committee just discussed sort of like their outcomes priorities for the program, and then Heidi and I will be working at the same time on the scoring matrices for the education and the construction program, and then we'll put those our recommended scoring matrices out back to the committee 2 weeks before our September meeting. So Mavis and Lauren, who's also on the Safe Routes Advisory Committee, will have a chance to look at that matrix for the construction and the education programs, and then provide comments for that. And then we'll discuss all of those comments in September. So hopefully by the end of the meeting in September, we'll have approved scoring matrices for the construction and the education program. So if you do have any comments or things to share through Mavis, and feel free if you want to CC me, I'd be happy to include anything like that in for anything for the committee. I did ask for time on your September agenda to come and talk with you guys about kind of like that matrix that the Safe Routes Advisory Committee is recommending, to sort of double check it with your gut checks and do a consult on it. So we'll be able to do that in September.
Do we have projects that are complete, and can we get a slideshow similar to Alan's so we can see sort of the results of the funding? It'd be great.
There are just 10 projects that have been completed so far, and I can work on a slideshow for that September meeting. But we do have 70 altogether funded, so I probably won't do all 70. I'll just focus on the 10 that are 10.
No,
Awesome.
10 is plenty. That's like when you say 70, that's really impressive.
Doesn't it sound great? I love
Oh my
that.
gosh, it sounds amazing.
We have 70 projects.
And if you all have noticed a trend
so-
that our presentations have this photo of a woman like jumping mid-air in them a lot, that is Leanne and LeGrand celebrating the first bit of sidewalk infill that was completed through the Safe Routes to School program.
I have a dream to do the Mary Tyler Moore style jump on all of the sidewalks and the crossings. It's either the Mary Tyler Moore jump or the Beatles Abbey Road album cover.
She also throws her hat too, so you could do that.
I know, I need a hat, right? I'll work on that too. Photos and getting a hat. You got it.
I want to do a brief review of what we have on our agenda builds for the September meeting, and see if any committee members have input for me and Hal in crafting that agenda, primarily with Jessica's support. I should give credit to Jessica. She does the heavy lifting, and then Hal and I meet and say, okay, yeah, we're good, or make a couple tweaks. So as Leanne said, the Safe Routes to School update is on the agenda. Ped bike safety at ODOT, so a safety office overview. That includes an update from Heidi Manlove on the ped bike safety education, transportation safety action plan, all roads transportation safety funding program, and the ped safety quick response. We were going to invite Nick Meltzer and Bob Jundes, the bicycle and pedestrian representatives from the Mobility Advisory Committee, to join us and provide an update of how their time on that committee is going so far, since they've been on for almost half a year by that point. Assistant Director Cooper Brown meet and greet on ODOT policy related items. And then Jessica just added, thank you, the SWIP strategic conversation. So the extension of today's conversation about 82nd, Keno and Corvallis, and making a final decision on that last piece. Any thoughts from committee members on kind of highest priority things that you'd like to see more time allocated to, any missing items that we should be adding to either our September or November agendas? Generally, how meetings are being run. I mean, Hal and I want feedback. We want to make OBPAC the best committee ever. So the way to do that is to get input from folks. And Lauren and Bill, if you have thoughts just from your observations today, welcome those as well.
I put on the chair vice chair election because we punted on that today.
How are we all feeling? Are our brains completely numb and we should aim for a 1 to 4 p.m. next time, because 1 to 5 virtual is a lot?
Maybe 1 to 4:30, and then, you know, if we end early, we end early.
Yeah, 1 to 5 is what is the hold that's on everyone's calendars, but we've been shooting to wrap up by 4:30. And I think that'll be with 2 breaks, so that'll be the regular practice. I'm pretty amazed that with the 15-minute late start, we are wrapping up on schedule still. So thank you all, with some big decisions made in there. So between now and your September meeting, you will be receiving from me an update on the 21-24 STIP with a link to the online open house for the Ped Bike Strategic Funds that we'll be sending out, and we'll have some time to discuss that as well. Is the, I think, one other thing that is not on the agenda for Build for September.
Thank you, everyone, for a very impressive meeting. I'm proud to be a part of the work that you're doing.
I have some exciting news to share. I got accepted into the CCOP internship program. So I'll be doing 2 6-month internships next summer and then the summer after. So who knows, I might be an ODOT employee by April if I get placed. So it all depends where I get placed, where I'm relocated to, but I'm really excited.
Right after this meeting, I'm going to call our intern coordinator and make sure I'm on the CCOP recruitment list.
Congrats,
Springfield wants
Erin.
Erin.
Congrats. That is so awesome. And Bill, thank you for joining us. Lauren, you too. Last call for anyone with something to share. Can we adjourn this meeting then? All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thanks for attending. It was a great meeting. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, Kat, you took over my host thing, so I can't stop recording. Or, okay, did you stop the recording? You're muted, hon.